Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Friday Ramblings. We are here, we are bearded, and we are back for one last wrap-up of the Justice Society. Now, as I talked about in a previous episode, this is going to be kind of a quick rapid fire of some of the characters who had a legacy but don't have a deep, iconic history to them. It's kind of a roundup epilogue type thing. It's still not going to cover every single person who's ever been part of the Justice Society, but it will give you a little bit of a deeper sense of who was involved with it. Although there's a couple people I might leave off just because they kind of deserve their own video in and of itself, but not necessarily, something related to this Justice Society series, since they weren't strictly Society characters. It'll make sense later. Still, as I said, we're going to do a quick roundup here. Few characters with a little bit of a legacy of their own. We're going to start with the most obscure of these, and that is the Mr. America legacy. Now, the original Mr. America was known as Tex Thompson, say that 5 times fast, and was in fact a Golden Age hero. First appeared in Action Comics #1 in June of 1938. Now, Tex Thompson was a good hero in his own right. Bit of a detective, like many of the Golden Age characters were. Had a bit of a patriotic suit with a little domino mask, kind of like what Robin wears. And more importantly, the iconic bullwhip, which was his signature weapon. That's important to remember for his later legacy. Now, he would serve as Mr. America for a good number of years before, at the request of President FDR, aka Franklin Roosevelt, which I have to specify because we also have a Teddy Roosevelt that was a president, so I couldn't just say President Roosevelt. There would have been 2 to choose from, and I didn't want people assuming wrong. But yes, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Mr. America to undergo some extra military training and serve as a World War II espionage agent under the new costumed name of Americommando. During this time, he would work with JSA member Mr. Terrific, who we'll be talking about in just a moment, and ended up getting caught in a bomb explosion in which he was presumed deceased. Years later, in a separate comic, in the late 80s, there would be a concept called the Hero Hotline, which was a commercial enterprise that provided short-term heroic intervention for those who called with emergencies or special situations. It was run by the coordinator. Now, the storyline and the concept didn't really go anywhere, and in story it was never revealed who the coordinator was. However, the writer has confirmed in years since it was his intention for it to be Tex Thompson, who had survived World War II, but was seeking to work more subtle and behind the scenes now that he was an aged veteran hero. Still, this is all about legacies, and years after this, during a storyline in which various Justice Society heroes would be targeted, or rather the descendants of the heroes would be targeted by Vandal Savage in an attempt to cut off the concept of the hero legacy by preventing new legacy heroes from emerging, we would meet ex-FBI agent Trey Thompson, who had decided to become a vigilante under the Mr. America identity. However, very early into his career, he is killed by Savage and his pawns. However, more importantly, his former informant and buddy in the FBI, Jeffrey Graves, would pick up where Trey left off, not only assume the Mr. America identity, but upon assuming it, also become one of Vandal Savage's targets, and through this, meet with and later join the Justice Society, where he served with the team as a regular member for quite a good chunk of time, eventually joining the Splinter JSA All-Stars team and becoming friends with fellow Legacy hero Lightning. So, good on you. Next up we have Ma Hunkel and her legacy. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ma Hunkel was a non-powered character who dressed up in a pair of long johns and tossed her favorite stew pot on top of her head, fighting crime in her neighborhood as Red Tornado. I know that name sounds familiar. She's not directly connected to the later android character who showed up in the Silver Age, whereas Maxine Ma Hunkel was, Abigail Ma Hunkel. Maxine's going to be in just a second. I'm jumping ahead of myself. But yes, Abigail Ma Hunkel was a Golden Age character. Basically, DC recycled the name since they still legally owned it. She was a briefly served character. However, back in the Golden Age, it was shown that she had briefly considered joining the Justice Society, but decided not to, mostly due to the fact that when she approached their headquarters, her outfit got a tear along the backside, playing up on the inherently comedic nature of the character. Years later, it would state, though, that she did eventually run into this society, and they let her in as originally an honorary member, who would later, in order to testify against organized crime in her neighborhood and put these criminals in jail, go into witness protection. Decades later in the Modern Justice Society series, when the last of these mobsters died, the Justice Society veterans from her Golden Age, this being Alan Scott, Jay Garrick, and Wildcat Ted Grant, decided to not only give her the news, but aid her in returning back to her old neighborhood, where for the first time in decades she was able to go back to her life. But that's not enough. Out of respect for what she had done in going into witness protection program and having to throw away her old life, including her children, for so many years, as well as the fact that she was a classic example of somebody with no formal martial arts training who refused to let criminals hold her back, even if she had to have a costumed identity to keep things safe. She was given a job as the caretaker of the JSA headquarters, which also served as a museum for the public, and in that role tended to serve as a symbolic grandmother to the younger members. Eventually, this would help the society out when they decided to continue to recruit and train young heroes, as Ma Hunkel's own granddaughter, Maxine, told you Maxine would come up later, was revealed to have powers of her own, these being wind-based powers similar to the classic Red Tornado android we know of, and she would take the name Cyclone serving well with the Justice Society, making many friends and being very supportive, as she was a good person like her grandmother. So, good job on the Hunkles. Now, this leads us to another character who was generally treated as a joke, even though he had access to great power, and that was Johnny Thunder. The real quick story of Johnny Thunder is that this is a gentleman who stumbled upon a isolated island civilization in which the people had deep mystic connections. Being the seventh son, born on the seventh day of the seventh month, he was seen as being karmically lucky and destined to have the greatest bit of their mystic might, specifically a genie known as the Thunderbolt. The genie would be summoned by the use of the magic words, which were spelled CEI-U, as in the letter, which basically phonetically translates out to English as says you. Unfortunately, Johnny himself was not exactly an intelligent man. He was a bit of a dork, a bit of a slow thinker. However, the power of the Thunderbolt was ultimately so powerful, and because his heart was as good-natured and pure as any hero's, he was led on to the Justice Society, in the words of a few members, for nothing else to keep an eye on him. He would help on several adventures over the years, and in fact was on the team that disappeared into the pocket dimension that kept the Justice Society off the boards for years. He later emerged and would eventually age to the age he should be, which is the senior citizen crowd. And this is where the legacy kicks in. While a senior citizen, he would end up accidentally passing ownership of the genie, who lived in a fountain pen that Johnny carried with him, because Johnny didn't have a magic lamp, you see, to a young boy named Joaquin, who would go on to serve the Justice Society as one of their student members under the name of Joaquin Thunder. During this time period, it would be clarified that the Thunderbolt genie was in fact a resident of the fifth dimension, similar to a few other impish characters such as Quisp from the Aquaman series and Mr. Mixelpick from the Superman villain set. We would see Justice Society would thus get involved in a couple adventures in the fifth dimension, where Joaquin would eventually learn to become a hero in his own right, and continue his friendship with the original Johnny Thunderbolt, including when Johnny made one last heroic sacrifice, honoring him by promising to take care of the Thunderbolt and keep using the Johnny Thunder name proudly. There's a little other stuff that gets more convoluted, but as I said, we're doing a quick roundup epilogue episode, so we're not going to quite get into all that. We do want to say that there is a couple other heroes that are basically part of this legacy. During the run of Infinity Inc., Roy Thomas introduced a female character named Johnny with an I, as opposed to the male character who was Johnny with a Y, Johnny Thunderbolt, who was the first attempt to continue the Thunderbolt lineage. Her powers were not connected to the Thunderbolt itself, but rather she had a small gold statue that gave her the power to turn into a human Thunderbolt while leaving her body behind. Originally, it was said that the statue was once struck by the hands of Apu Ilapu, the Inca lightning god. It was revealed in later issues of Infinity Inc. to actually be a hostile alien energy being who, upon being defeated and re-imprisoned in the statue completely, leaves Johnny without her powers. It should be noted, Johnny Thunderbolt was created by Roy Thomas, who was quite an expert on the Golden Age, and thus it was truly done as a loving homage. We also have the son of Johnny Thunder, William Two Trees, also known as Will Power, who served on the brief team Primal Force. William Two Trees was the son of Johnny Thunder and a Apache woman. Johnny himself, because this is the 40s, abandoned his son due to fear of how society would take their mixed relationship, and the child's being a product of a mixed marriage. Yeah, things weren't always as happy as they are in the 2020s, folks. I'm sorry to say. Johnny would later say that he regretted this decision deeply, but, he was a young, foolish man. Eventually, though, as William Two Trees grew up, he would develop astonishing Thunderbolt-related powers of his own, and took the name Willpower to join the supernatural metahuman team called Primal Force, sometimes known as the Laymen, until it was disbanded. He was last seen touring with a rock band as a Human Light Show, and has not been referenced in decades. Kind of sad. Be neat if somebody picked this plot point up, maybe a Joaquin William team up. I don't know, but there you go. Our final entry in this epilogue list is two legacy, but a significant one mostly for what the second person in this legacy did. We are talking about the Mr. Terrific story. The original Mr. Terrific was a gentleman named Terry Sloan, a self-made millionaire whose photographic memory, Olympic-level athletic skills, and mastery of the martial arts made him something of a Renaissance man. Eventually deciding to utilize these skills to fight crime after graduating college at age 13 and getting, as we said before, his business up and going. Originally, though, before he became a superhero, he found himself actually suicidal because he had accomplished every goal he had set in his life and accomplished it in record speed. He had felt, even though he was still a young man, there was nothing left in life for him to do. He was already one of the smartest people on Earth. He was incredibly athletic. He'd proven he could make money anytime he wanted to. Eventually, though, while contemplating these suicidal thoughts, he would see a young woman jump from a bridge, and Sloan, reacting on pure instinct, saved the woman. She then later asked him to assist his brother, who had been caught up in a gang, and Sloan did so, creating the superhero identity of Mr. Terrific, providing him what he had been missing in his life, a sense of accomplishment, and giving back to his fellow man in a very direct way. And of course, when I say man, I mean humanity, helping people of all genders. He was famous for his catchphrase of fair play, highlighting the fact that he was essentially a hero of honor. He did not like to cheat or take shortcuts, believing that people's accomplishments should be based on skill and courage. He would join the Justice Society of America until the team dissolved during the early Cold War. Following the dissolution of the JSA, Mr. Terrific retired, eventually coming out of retirement when the Justice Society of America formed in modern times. His last mission would be one in which his team crossed over with the Justice League of America at what was originally supposed to be a social meeting. However, it turned into murder as Mr. Terrific's old foe, the Spirit King, possessed the body of Jay Garrick and used it to murder Terry Sloan. This is something that would haunt Jay Garrick for the rest of his life, especially when later iterations of the team would confront the Spirit King. Terry had suspected the Spirit King was possessing one of the heroes, and that was his primary reason for choosing to attend that year, where he had rarely attended the previous social gatherings of the two Justice teams. Unfortunately, he was not able to deduce who Spirit King was possessing before the trap was sprung. Years later, a equally talented prodigy and Renaissance man, Michael Holt, would appear, and having heard of Terry Sloan and seeing him as a role model, Holt would eventually take on the Mr. Terrific mantle. Holt himself was often haunted by the death of his wife and unborn child in a freak car accident. This gave him a very pessimistic outlook towards matters of faith, which would be a plot point in multiple Justice Society arcs, which contemplated some amused reactions from his teammates when they would point out, dude, you work with people who have proved reincarnation exists. You have interacted with ghosts in person. You have dealt with devils. You have literally seen hell. And you're telling me you're an atheist. And Holt pointing out, I'm a scientist. I just don't believe. I know it exists, but I don't have faith. Which any theology majors should know is an important difference. Knowing and believing. Still, Holt would serve with the modern iteration of the JSA, proudly even serving for an extended period as chairman. Holt primarily had two major abilities going for him besides his incredible intelligence and martial arts training, which is he had a collection of little floating orbs called his T-spheres, which he could use for a variety of mechanical and electronic tasks, including tasing villains or creating little energy prisons to contain people after they'd been knocked out, as well as, while Holt was in uniform, some of the nanites he had programmed that helped him interact with his T-spheres mentally also served to make him invisible to all forms of electrical surveillance, which proved extremely useful during the Brother Eye stuff, where we had a case of AI go mad. That is a huge plot point for later. Mr. Terrific would, thanks to a couple time-traveling storylines, meet the original Mr. Terrific, the two bonding as Terry Sloan gave Michael Holt his full endorsement, as he quickly realized Holt was doing the legacy proud. And that wraps us up, folks. As I said, there's various other JSA characters who served, some of whose legacies I may go into intense detail just on a general purpose because their legacies weren't necessarily always tied to the JSA. Some people joined the JSA even though their legacies started off with other teams, including some whose legacies didn't start till the Silver Age. So, we'll touch on those characters, probably at least a couple of them, in the future, but this Justice Society themed stretch of videos is over. As always, I highly encourage you to check out the Justice Society comic books. The series that started in 1999 is exceptional and is probably my favorite volume of the series, though, as it is a late 90s, early 2000s series. It does tend to interconnect with a lot of company-wide events. So if you're doing a big binge of all the issues, you will run into issues that are tie-ins to bigger events. If you're not familiar with those events, just kind of gut through it or skip those issues. It's just something you got to do when you read comic books. Still, for this week we are done. And I hope you join us in 7 days for another rambling, because I will always be here, as Friday is for rambling, and we are all about the entertainment here at Roulette Productions. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment, tweet me, whatever you want to do with your internet time. Just stay happy, stay entertained, stay rambling.